Welcome to the Have Madeline Will Travel podcast. This is A Year of Dracula, Part 1, the novel and the ballet. He that can smile at death as we know him, who can flourish in the midst of diseases that kill off whole peoples. Oh, if such a one was to come from God and not the devil, what a force for good might he not be in this old world of ours. In the last year, I've consumed a lot of Dracula media. In October 2022, I saw Orlando Ballet's amazing production of Michael Pink's Dracula. This performance stuck in my mind, and a few months later when I was deciding what to read, I thought I should revisit Stoker's 1897 novel. I read it when I was in middle school, but the details were very faded, and 11-year-olds are stupid, so I probably would get a lot more out of it now. I think Dracula is one of those properties that everyone is familiar with via osmosis and pop culture depictions, but I really don't know that many people who have read the original novel. I like thinking about adaptation and how popular stories and characters evolve over time, so I figured it would be very interesting to go back to the source. Lindsay Ellis has a great essay about some of the ideas in her video, The Case for Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Part 1. Overview. Dracula is an epistolary novel. The novel is mostly diary entries and letters between the characters as they band together to fight Count Dracula. The broad strokes of the plot probably don't need to be recapped, but the novel kicks off with Jonathan Harker in Transylvania brokering a deal with the Count to purchase properties in London. Dracula imprisons Harker in his castle and makes his way to England. Vampire mayhem ensues, and a group of friends, along with the eccentric Van Helsing, assemble to drive him out of England. And spoilers, it's pretty good. The first maybe 10% of the book, dealing with Harker in Transylvania, is a pretty straight-up gothic horror novel. Once the action shifts to England, though, it becomes almost like a detective story, as the characters gather evidence and try to piece together what is happening and how to stop it. The last quarter or so become a chase through Europe, with the ticking clock of Harker's wife Mina slowly turning into a vampire after being bitten. The group has to destroy Dracula before he gets back to his castle, or he will just hole up for the next century and Mina will become one of the undead. The hunters might otherwise have been content to let him go once they had driven him out of England. I wouldn't say any of it is scary per se, but there are some creepy parts, particularly Chapter 7, the log of the doomed ship Demeter that is transporting the Count to England. I also found the scenes where the men go to Dracula's London properties to destroy his boxes of earth genuinely tense, as they have no idea what they're in for or whether they might actually run into him. There are some pretty effective oh no moments in it too, which is kind of impressive for a work that has been popular for so long, and that I've read before. It's hard to gauge what the original audience would have thought of all of this, especially the detective novel aspect, since vampires, and Dracula in specific, were not a pervasive part of the public consciousness. For a modern reader, it can definitely be hard to remember that these characters don't know what a vampire is. When Renfield talks about the Count showing up as a cloud of mist, we say, yep, vampires do be like that. But was that originally a huge, oh shit moment? I don't know. The epistolary structure of the novel is actually woven into the narrative when Mina decides they should compile all their accumulated notes and letters to hammer down the timeline and figure out clues as to what Dracula's intent and abilities might be. It gives the sense that the novel isn't a work by Stoker, the author, but by Mina, the character. Part 2. The man himself. The most surprising thing in reading Dracula is that the title character is not in it very much. After the action shifts out of Castle Dracula, you see him directly maybe 5 times, and all very briefly. He absolutely looms over the entire book, but he's not physically present for most of it. It's amazing then how much he caught on, with most adaptations making him essentially the main character. It's also interesting that the vampires explode when sunlight hits them, just as in the book. He can't shapeshift during the daytime, but he has no trouble walking around, and the characters encountering up and about in broad daylight twice. I don't know when the sunlight thing was injected into vampire lore. Was it invented for the movies, or did it predate the novel, and it was just something Stoker didn't bother with? At some point, I'll probably get sucked into a rabbit hole looking at which bits of vampire lore Stoker came up with, which were always kicking about, and which were invented later. And while we're on pop culture vampire traits that aren't present in the novel, Dracula isn't framed as seductive at all. Mina is actively repulsed by him, even before she knows what he is. Princess Weeks, in her excellent video essay, How Mina Murray Became Dracula's Girlfriend, talks about 2 precursors to Stoker's book, The Vampire from 1819 and Carmilla from 1872, which might have been syncretized with Dracula, as the pop culture version of Dracula takes traits from the characters in those other stories. Watch her whole video. It's great, and as the title suggests, she talks a lot about the transformation of Mina over time. Speaking of Mina, Part 3. Mina herself. In an ensemble novel with a fairly large cast, Mina Harker, née Murray, stands out to me as the best character. I would argue she, more than anyone else, is the protagonist. The narrative bends towards her once she shows up. Jonathan, the protagonist in the first part, is almost a background character by the end. Mina is a driving force, motivated to stop Dracula for what he did to her friend Lucy. She is the raising of the stakes when she gets bitten, and so much of the dialogue is about how the men all love her. The last line of the novel is about Mina. We want no proofs. We ask for none to believe us. The boy will someday know what a brave and gallant woman his mother is. Already he knows her sweetness and loving care. Later on he will understand how some men so loved her that they did dare much for her sake. In a lot of ways, Dracula is her story. The three main POV characters are Mina, Jonathan, and Dr. Seward, the psychologist who runs an asylum near one of Dracula's properties. Seward is also a suitor to Lucy, Mina's best friend and Dracula's first victim in England. I'm not sure what the narrator breakdown is, and weirdly, even in a time of obsessive fandom cataloging, I didn't find one online, but a quick and dirty look shows Seward has the most entries, followed by Mina, then Jonathan. That's just entries, I didn't look up page count. Mina, though, by impact, sure feels like she has the biggest part. Maybe it's the nature of her voice. Her sections were the most engaging to me, as Mina feels the most well-rounded and relatable of the characters. She's upfront about her worries and emotions, and she's kind of the only one who gets to really react to things in any depth. Jonathan, while he dominates the first 4 chapters, is singularly focused on how screwed he is at Dracula's castle, and he takes a back seat after his return to England. Seward tends to be very clinical, appropriate for a doctor who prioritizes empiricism, and is more of a tool for Stoker to deliver the plot. The book definitely has some Victorian sensibilities regarding Mina, with a male character doing the women are delicate creatures to be cherished and sheltered from things bit. But at the same time, the men aren't framed as being right, and the narrative punishes them for excluding her, e.g., them keeping things from Mina gets her bitten by Dracula, among other things. She is definitely the moral center of the group. She's understanding and perceptive, and even after she's been bitten, she shows deep empathy. She has a sense of justice that goes beyond just vengeance. Not surprisingly, perhaps, she does end up managing most of the group's emotional load and keeps them focused. This is all pretty standard Victorian gender role stuff, but where it gets a little subversive is in the injection of those Victorian ideas into one of the most active agents in the novel. She's arguably the most capable character, and things start to tilt in the group's favor when the men start including her. She's pretty much the brains of the whole operation. Compiling the diary entries as an investigation tool is her idea. Using hypnosis to track Dracula via their psychic link after he bites her is her idea. She never loses her shit either, even when facing the prospect of becoming a vampire. In her relationship with Jonathan, she is an equal, and he's way more of a nervous wreck than she ever is. I guess it's understandable as he's been through the ringer, but it was still kind of a surprising inversion of expectations. The other characters are all explicit about how awesome Mina is and how much they respect her ability. Toward the end, Van Helsing says to Jonathan, "Take heart afresh, dear husband of Madame Mina," reversing the usual practice by addressing him in relation to his wife. Van Helsing also says she has a man's brain with a woman's heart, which is pretty yikes, but for a story written by a man in 1897, it's a high compliment. The entire novel is surprisingly egalitarian, with regards to Mina anyway. She also has one of my favorite lines in the novel, regarding pity for even a monster like the Count. "Jonathan, dear, and you all my true friends, I want you to bear something in mind through all this dreadful time. I know that you must fight, that you must destroy, even as you destroyed the false Lucy, so that the true Lucy might live hereafter. But it is not a work of hate. The poor soul who wrought all this misery is the saddest case of all. Just think what will be his joy when he too is destroyed in his worser part, that his better part may have spiritual immortality. You must be pitiful to him too, though it may not hold your hands from his destruction." And she's right. As she watches Dracula be destroyed, she says, "I shall be glad as long as I live that even in that moment of final dissolution, there was in the face a look of peace, such as I never could have imagined might have rested there." Yeah, Mina rules. I knew him at once from the description of the others. One aspect of the book that is odd after so many pop culture depictions is how Mina and Dracula only meet once when he bites her. Mina having some sort of connection or attraction with Dracula is an idea injected in later adaptations, with some going so far as making her the reincarnated lost love. I really hate that trope, by the way. I was very glad not to see it in the novel. It's also extra icky because in the novel, Dracula symbolically rapes her. He's the author of all her pain and trauma in the novel. Princess Weeks' video goes into some of the reasons this might be, as well as looks into how the characterization of Mina has changed and flattened over time, going from active agent to more damsel/prize to be fought over. I can't recommend that video enough. Weeks also has a very interesting discussion on how Lucy's characterization has changed over the years as well. We always assume these olden authors are going to be the backwards ones, but the path of Mina through the years shows us regressing the character, even as we get deeper into modernity. Part 4. Some random thoughts. The indifference of cities. There's a scene in central London that I thought was kind of funny. The men have only one more property of Dracula's to cleanse, but unlike the others which were abandoned, this one is in busy Piccadilly Circus. When formulating the plan, they worry about getting arrested breaking into the place. Then they just kind of realize that London's a big city. If they just act confident, people are just going to go on about their business because surely these well-dressed gentlemen aren't brazenly breaking and entering. Surely they're supposed to be here. And they have a lord with them who can just bullshit them out of it if needed. It doesn't come to that, and they just get into the property with no issue, other than they stumble into Dracula there. But it was amusing that they had that realization about urban life. It felt modern. Van Helsing and comic relief. Van Helsing isn't the cackling maniac that Anthony Hopkins plays him as in the 1992 movie, a performance I do enjoy quite a bit, by the way. There's not much levity at all in the novel, but Van Helsing, with his amusing malapropisms, sometimes provides some light whimsy. However, the milk that is spilt cries not out afterwards, as you say. There's absolutely no equivalent to the very funny smash cut in the 1992 movie when Mina asks how Lucy died. I absolutely laughed out loud at the scene when I rewatched it in December. It was a jarringly funny scene, in a good way, in a movie that was really heavy and gross. Also, I felt the writing of him as a non-native English speaker was handled pretty well. It wasn't as dramatic as an I dialect, but he occasionally conjugated verbs incorrectly and had some odd sentence construction. It was enough to differentiate his dialogue, but I didn't feel like it was overdone. An I dialect is deliberate non-standard spelling to emphasize how a word is pronounced. Think Huck's speech in Huckleberry Finn or Magwitch's in Great Expectations. Don't mess with Texas. One member of the vampire hunting group is Quincy Morris, an American. To quote Weeks, his whole personality is from Texas, and he loves guns. I'm not sure if Stoker was making a point about Americans or not, but it's kind of funny to think he was. The Romani. The portrayal of the Romani in the book is a little... well, it probably captures how shitty people were to the Romani in the 1890s, doesn't it? The plot contrivance. There's one really big plot contrivance in the novel, and that's Dracula's ship happening to crash into the harbor at Whitby, where his prisoner's wife happens to be, and him deciding to feed on her best friend for reasons unclear. Lucy's involvement is what brings everyone into the plot, but it is weirdly disconnected from the Jonathan stuff the novel started with. It didn't bother me, but it is something that occurred to me. The ending. The final defeat of Dracula is a little anticlimactic if looked from an action perspective. Unlike the 1992 film, where the sun sets just as the group catches up to him and he bursts out to fight them, in the novel they catch him before he wakes up. But it is handled well, and the framing, as the event is viewed from Mina at a distance, gives it a desperate voyeuristic feel. She can't affect what's going to happen now, and just has to let it play out and hope. She, and the reader by extension, is left with an it's up to God now kind of fatalism, which brings its own form of tension. I think it's a similar desperate vibe the movie got through an action-packed ending in a visual medium. Part 5. Recommendation. Would I recommend this book? Yes. Read it. Not just because it's seminal, it's also pretty good. Part 6. The Ballet. After I finished writing about the novel, I realized that the ballet that inspired me to reread it deserved more than a passing comment. And since it's a direct adaptation of Stoker's 1897 novel, rather than a pastiche on the character as seen in 100+ years of media, I can thematically justify talking about it here. And forgive me, I don't know very much about ballet, so I don't have the lexicon to describe it in a way that does it justice. The ballet Dracula was created in 1996 by British choreographer Michael Pink during his time at the Northern Ballet in Leeds, England. Side note, in 1989 he created Strange Meeting, which is a one-act ballet based on the works of Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen is one of my favorite poets. I would really like to see a production of this sometime. While it condenses some characters and the plot diverges pretty significantly from the novel in the last third or so, I think it is an excellent adaptation. A ballet is obviously very different than a novel, and this version takes advantage of the new medium. It's intense, harrowing, creepy, occasionally scary, and the score is fantastic. It opens with Harker in bed, tormented by his time in Transylvania. The stage is sparse with just his bed, but very quickly the stage fills with mist, and as the music gets more ominous and intense, werewolves scurry onto his bed and the scene fills with nightmares. Eventually Mina's corpse is brought to him and then comes alive in a perversion of a wedding ceremony, with corrupted clergy and all. The music and dancing get more and more frantic, and it culminates with Mina taking a giant stake in the shape of a crucifix and plunging it into his chest as the lights go out and the title drops. It was 4 minutes in, and I was completely hooked. Harker's trauma was palpable. It was probably the most intense thing I'd ever seen at the ballet. Dracula himself is played hypnotically. He's pretty ghoulish looking, but his dancing, at least to me, was very otherworldly, almost serpentine maybe. His movements are very different than the rest of the cast. Dracula clearly has some hypno-mind powers, shown very strikingly during the ballroom scene with Lucy. It starts with a light, fun ensemble dance with Lucy and her suitors, and then the atmosphere starts to change when flashing lights signal the storm that brings Dracula to shore. When he appears at the top of the staircase, everyone except Lucy goes into super slow motion, and she, enthralled, makes her way up to him. It was a very impressive and unsettling scene. Another standout moment is the end of Act 2 at the asylum when Lucy dies. The characters gather around her dead body, and as the music trails off, Van Helsing/Seward either goes to kiss her forehead or places a crucifix on her. I couldn't see from where I was sitting. And she lets out the most blood-curdling scream, convulses, and then goes berserk and attacks them while the score thunders back in. It was genuinely shocking. I jumped in my seat. And bonus for Dracula suddenly appearing on the catwalk in the background, looming over them while it goes down. The ending scene, while very different than the book, is also great. The music, the dancing, everything. It felt apocalyptic. Dracula has kidnapped Mina to the vault of Carfax Abbey. Undead are everywhere. The vampiric Lucy arrives with Renfield, who they tear to pieces and eat. Everything is fucked. The ending is much more ambiguous than in the novel. Dracula is destroyed at the cost of Quincy, as in the novel, but the staging and the music had a bleak, sorrowful tone, and the show ends with Mina in spotlight, mournfully touching her neck where Dracula bit her. Is she free of the curse? Are the undead, and Lucy, who scurried away when the heroes burst into the vault in a blast of explosives and sunlight, still out there? I don't know. Neither do the heroes. And that's great. One of the awesome things about live theater is that it exists in the moment. You're in the same room as the performers, and the audience gives it an extra energy, especially in an incredibly tense show like Dracula. The downside is that while I cannot recommend the show enough, it's not something you could just go out and consume. So if you ever see it's playing, go see it, please. The full thing seems to be on Vimeo, but it doesn't really capture the feeling of seeing it in person. But take a look if you're even a little curious. Originally published December 17th, 2023. This has been the Have Mandolin Will Travel podcast. I'm Matt Giuliano, and I hope you've enjoyed this piece. Check out havemandolinwilltravel.com for a closer look at some of my other projects and to hear my music. Cheers, and happy listening.